Okay, so now I want to introduce our next speaker, and this is Jenn Turner. And Jenn has had the honor of working with survivors of trauma for really all of her career. And along with working in private practice as a trauma-informed therapist, she is the co-director of the Center for Trauma and Embodiment in Needham, Massachusetts, where she works to oversee training and supports the development of body-first interventions for healing from trauma. And Jenn also leads trainings in the Trauma Center Trauma-Sensitive Yoga throughout the United States and provides consultations to organizations on how to become more trauma-informed at all levels. And in 2021, she edited the book Embodied Healing, Survivor and Facilitator Voices from the Practice of Trauma-Sensitive Yoga. She's done some sessions in the pre-conference that people were really excited about, so we're also extremely excited to have her here today. Please give a warm welcome to Jenn Turner.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful space. I hope you all had a wonderful lunch. Really honored to be here and to share with you all a little bit about the work that I've been doing for the last 17 years and that we've been doing at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment for the last 22 years. So we'll talk about interoceptive awareness. That may be a new word for some of you. Maybe it's familiar. I will define it. But I'll talk and share about how bringing awareness into our bodies and into our sensations can actually really support trauma healing. But first, I'll share a little bit about me, just to give a context. First of all, I will say that I really like to be interrupted. I'm not sure what that's about, but if you have a question or something that comes up as I'm talking, feel free to, we got an interruption right now. What's my puppy's name? Yes, that's Amara. So Amara, that was last year, and she's now almost 120 pounds, so I cannot quite hold her in the same way, but she's still very cuddly. So yes, a bit about me is I am a mom of a dog and children, and I grew up on a small island off the coast of Maine, actually. A lot of people think about Maine in terms of vacationing and like boats and lobster, which that's there, but also it's actually one of the poorest states in the country. And so there's a lot of things that come with poverty, a lot of domestic violence, a lot of substance use. You know, we see a lot of disparities in terms of zip codes around socioeconomics and trauma. So I grew up around trauma and grew up with it not only, you know, in my personal life, but witnessing it, witnessing intergenerational trauma and how that impacts a parent and parents. And, you know, I name this in part because I think there's a really big stigma for us providers in that many times we're drawn to this work because we have our own history, because we have lived through something a family member has, we've witnessed, and that is part of the work, and it is often what draws us. That is often the why. And so naming that and creating space for that in this room as well. Also, I have my own path of healing using the body. I came to find yoga when I had a singing teacher, actually. I used to sing. I still do, but largely in the shower or my car. But I was singing on a stage not dissimilar from this, and it was kind of a master class setting, and she said to me, "You're not in your body." And I looked down at my body. I was like, I see it, like I'm breathing, like what the heck is she talking about? And she's like, go do some yoga and you'll figure it out. And I did. I did some yoga. I fell in love with yoga. And I started to drop into my body. It was like I was hovering above my body somehow. I wasn't really rooted in my body. And doing that and starting to understand that paved the way for me to become first a yoga practitioner, and then found my way through doing yoga really wanting to dig deeper in understanding why it was that certain people would be limited, I guess, in certain movements, or why sometimes someone might move into a posture or shape and then emotion would come. I wanted to know the why of that. So I went back and did more schooling and training. And then, so from really the beginning of my work, it's been around integrating the body and trying to understand how that fits into a psychological and Western medical model that's largely top-down focused. It's largely oriented to how can we use our thoughts to change how we feel. But what if we can use our body to change our thoughts and how we feel? What if we can use our body to change our overall sense of presence and well-being? So that's been a curiosity for me for a long time. So I do have a small private practice. Most of my work is at an organization I co-founded with a colleague of mine called the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. So about 22 years ago, my colleague Dave Emerson started doing research and writing around using yoga as a treatment for complex trauma or PTSD. And at that time, in 2002, it was not really spoken about the way it is today, that we could use the body to heal from trauma, that was an important component of healing. And so he was a real pioneer, and I was able to join him shortly after he started. We started doing research and examining things. One thing that also happened, though, is that we were in an environment building this yoga program, running classes, doing research, but in the context of what to me was a very familiar dynamic of experts saying one thing and doing another. So trauma experts that know a ton about trauma and trauma care saying one thing, but then in staff meetings seeing abuse of power, seeing trauma reenacted in that setting. And so Dave and I noticed, we managed it, we learned, and then decided 7 years ago to depart from that organization and create our own standalone organization, because we wanted to create a space that not only honored the survivorship outside of the organization, the clients that we serve, the people that we work with, but also within the organization, right? It's all too often that as providers, we get told we are supposed to self-care. It's like, why do I have to self-care so much when I'm in a community where there's not community care? Or why am I having to self-care so hardcore outside of work? Because, of course, it's intense, the work that many of us do, but also we're oftentimes absorbing intensity from the people around us. So for us, it was really important, okay, if we're going to be trauma-informed, we have to be as well, and that means looking at ourselves, how we lead, how we supervise, how we manage, how we train, and showing up in authenticity. A tall order, but we are working at it and continuing to unlearn things that we inherited and learned along the way. So we have 3 programs at the Center for Trauma and Embodiment. They're all original models that we've created using the body first as interventions for trauma. The oldest is our yoga model. We have a weightlifting model and a theater-based model. All that really, again, center around the body. I'll share a bit more about some of that as we move through the slides. So in developing our care models, right, it was really important for us to take a holistic look at why we do what we do, is it working, scrutinize the work. So for one, even in the early days, it was really collaboratively developed with, I remember sitting in team meetings when we were trying to figure out, what does this look like to bring the body to complex trauma survivors? right? Different than single incident trauma survivors, which are often the folks that are researched or research is applied to and models are tested on. And really thinking about what would we need to do to change yoga in the beginning, since that was our first model, to create a space where people could feel welcome, all of them could show up, that would be safe, slow enough, all of these things, right? So collaboration with clinicians that had many years, tens of 20, 30 years experience in this field. We've been doing this work for 22 years, and we've also always sort of pulled from trauma theory, attachment theory, neuroscience, before we had our own original research. It's like, let's pull from these domains that exist and have a lot of backing and research behind them as well. Also, research has been so important to our work, and you can have access to that. I'll give you a QR code at the end you can scan, so you can connect with me and have access to all the different research and papers that we've done if you're curious to learn more. But continuing to do research and to research not only on complex trauma survivors that were in our initial study, but to folks that are all around the globe that have different lived experiences, different ages, different gender expressions. All too often, we also see models of care and treatment that are researched on a specific population, and then it's sort of assumed it's going to work for everyone, right? And so really for us, what's important is continuing to be curious about, what does this look like with Indigenous folks in Canada? We have a project right now. What does this look like for refugees in Palestine that we're doing work with and doing research around that and getting curious? So we're not assuming that something that we conjured up in our minds in and around Boston, Massachusetts, which is, layers of privilege in academia, that also is relevant to someone across the globe, or what do we need to change in order for it to be? So thinking about cultural context as well. So I'd love to invite you all to join me in a little bit of a soft landing. And when we founded the Center for Trauma and Embodiment, we were jazzed and doing all our meetings and, diving into content and plans and strategy. And one thing that we realized, like year 2, is that we weren't walking the walk in terms of dropping into our bodies. Everything was like super cognitive. We weren't allowing ourselves to drop into our bodies when we gathered together. So we started this practice, and I'd love to invite you to join me. I'm going to sit in a chair too, because it feels weird to not if you all are. So I'm just going to invite us to do a chair yoga practice. You could listen, you could tune out, you could join me in any way that you like. This is something that I might do at the beginning of a meeting. I do in session with clients. I might do before I come on stage in preparation for a moment like this. So when you're ready, you're welcome to take a moment to acknowledge that you're here. You arrived, you made it, you're in your seat. And a possibility, bless you, that you begin to bring your awareness to your body. One way to do that could be through movement. And if you'd like, you're welcome to begin to move, maybe by shifting your chin from side to side. So you could shift your chin from one side to the other. You might even wiggle your jaw. And again, if you haven't done this kind of thing before, you're not sure about it, you can listen, watch. You also could lift and lower with your chin. You're welcome to explore continuous movement, or maybe you pause somewhere. And then at some point, you might drop your chin to your chest. You're welcome to hang out there. Or you could shift into head circles. And the circles could be half circles, full circles, or anything in between. As you're moving, you might notice that you're breathing. You could breathe through your nose or your mouth. And you're welcome to stay with head circles, or we could shift some awareness to our spines. You might even stay as you are. You could scooch forward a little on your chair if you like. Possibly taking a moment to begin to lengthen your spine. So that might be that you lift through your chest, you might lift your chin, your shoulders could draw back, or you might also round your spine and drop your chin. So you could move between these two shapes and gestures. Maybe it's continuous movement, or you could pause anywhere along the way. Possibly continuing this movement for 3, and 2, and 1. So from here, maybe you stay with that movement, or if you'd like, you could lean forward. Right now, I know we may not have a ton of space, right? We've got those chairs in front of us. If you have an empty chair, you could even put your hands on the back of it. Pull one of those. Or you could just let your forearms rest on the tops of your legs and maybe drop your chin to your chest. You might move here. You could let your head roll from side to side. You might even shift from one side to the other, or maybe hanging out in stillness. Again, possibly hanging out here for another moment or two, but always knowing you could make a different choice from what I offer. You might stay in a shape for longer or move out of it more quickly. And then whenever you're ready, you're welcome to find your way back up, possibly towards seated. And we could do maybe one more thing together if you're interested. So possibly having your hands resting on the tops of your legs or wherever they are. You might begin to lift and lower with your hands. So this could be a small shape or gesture, could be a bigger one. And if paying attention to your breath seems something that you're curious about in this moment, you could also link your breath to your movement. So maybe inhaling in one direction, exhaling in another. You could stay with this movement, or if you want to take up a little more space, you could extend your arms up and maybe lower them back down. Again, it's your choice if you move or how you move. Great. And then whenever you're ready, you could stay with this, or if you'd like, shifting back into your chair and maybe taking a moment just to notice Be aware of your body, maybe any shifts or changes. So curious if anyone noticed anything, and when I ask for that, it doesn't have to be that like it felt good. Sometimes it's that we notice it doesn't feel good or something feels off. I don't know if anyone wants to shout out what they might have noticed. Stiff, yes, someone felt stiff, right. Noticing that there's some stiffness there. Maybe you weren't aware of it before. Tense, yeah, noticing some tension. Cracking in your neck, totally. I felt some of that too. More present. Made more space in my body, somehow made more space in my body. Yeah, right. So cool. So oftentimes, right, we may not pay attention to our body because it supports us. If we're tired or tense or stiff, ignoring that typically helps us be in the world. If I realize how tired I am, or maybe I start to feel a lump in my throat and realize I have some emotion there, how am I going to go about my day? Right? What if I get triggered? Or what if I can't focus? So oftentimes, the way that our lives are constructed, it sort of supports us in being disconnected from our bodies at times. What is it like to be at a conference and sit in a chair for 2 days, right? That does something to our bodies. And our clients come to us with that kind of lived experience often as well, and sometimes in a way that's really profound. So this is a quote that I really love. It's from a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio, who really pioneered the idea, which is kind of wild for a neuroscientist, that our body knows first. Like our cells know before our brain knows information, what is true, it's a powerful thing, and we find that it's really true, in fact, when we look at the way we process sensory information. And if we think about the ways that a lot of treatment is designed, it's designed for us almost as if we had like a frontal lobe and happen to have a body. It's like we're a thinking brain, and there just like happens to be this like bag of bones and everything else over here. So what we've always been really curious about is, well, how can we really integrate the body into the work? What does that look like if our body knows first? So what we know is that sensory information, this is usually how it goes. Sensory information comes into us, and that can be external. It could be the lights that are shining right now, the air I feel moving. That could also be what's within my body, right? That could be my stomach grumbling, something like this. So sensory information comes to us and goes right to the thalamus. The thalamus is a relay station that sends information to both the amygdala and the neocortex, so for further like evaluation of the sensory information. So what we know is that the amygdala is like the smoke alarm in the brain. Some of this may be familiar, maybe this is new for some of you. But the amygdala is the smoke alarm in the brain. Will set off if there's sensory information that is worrisome. And information also at the same time goes to the neocortex. What's interesting about this is that information arrives, the route, if we think about it like train stations, is quicker for the information to arrive at the amygdala. So I could have sensory information come in, goes to the thalamus, then the amygdala, and then my smoke alarm starts blaring. So I don't know if anyone has ever set up their smoke alarm in their kitchen, but it's hard to think about anything else other than like, how do I make this stop? Open the windows, run around the house. I don't want the fire to come. Like it's just, I'm just burning some eggs on the pan or something. And so the information then after the amygdala arrives at the neocortex shortly after, like seconds, but if the smoke alarm is already going off, how am I going to talk myself down or out of a smoke alarm? Sometimes I might be able to say, oh yeah, it's just the eggs on the pan. Other times I may not, and that my whole system gets revved up. So people can, and all of us can become hormonally and emotionally activated before we're even aware of what's happening, consciously. So then the hippocampus, from the amygdala, the hippocampus acts to integrate the experience and store it in memory. But what we know is that when we go through experiences that have a lot of emotional weight or valence, that inhibits the hippocampus from processing memories and getting integrated. So what happens, right? The hippocampus is unable to, when we experience something that is overwhelming or has an extreme emotional valence, the hippocampus is unable to integrate the memory and process it as a whole. So as a result, right, our memory from that event, from that smoke alarm, is fragmented, is left unintegrated, is more likely to come back as somatic flashbacks when something is reminiscent of a traumatic experience. What we also know, to kind of further, support using our bodies and prioritizing them in care and treatment, is this place in the brain called Broca's Area, which is where our narrative lives. It's in our frontal brain, and it's the part of our brain that's activated when we're telling our story, when we're talking about our lives, when I've told you where I was from and about my dog and all of that. What we know is that when people are speaking about their trauma, that part of the brain shuts down. Or when their incident trauma is being read to them, a narrative they've written out, that part of the brain becomes deactivated or de-emphasized. So oftentimes we'll have an experience of clients being unable to speak about things. Sometimes we call that resistance, right? They don't want to open up, they don't want to share. What actually may be true is that they don't have words, that there aren't words. I think intuitively we can sense that some things are unspeakable, or it's hard to even speak about them. Part of that is what is happening in our brains. And so, we often rely on people telling their story as a way to heal. Maybe I'm just telling it by rote, but not in an integrated way. Yeah, please.
You also will experience cortical inhibition, interferes with the use of logic.
Yes.
So you're having a problem with both not able to speak, the autobiographical part of it, but also being unable to express the logic of a certain circumstance, what we might call a rational thought.
Yes.
Neurobiology has been hijacked.
Yes.
Now in the system that must respond to the implicit memory that's not processed.
Exactly. So for anyone that either couldn't hear that, I'll try to distill what you said, but what happens is that our logic gets inhibited. A lot of the memories that we talked about too are stored in implicit memory, right, which has no words. That's our procedural memory. And so there's a disconnect, and our prefrontal cortex and our implicit memory don't communicate. That's not very well. They do, but not very well. And so to your point, right, logic is inhibited, our autobiographical and our ability to tell our story is inhibited. One more thing that I get excited about is that we have all these afferent nerve fibers. So we have efferent and afferent nerve fibers. So we have nerve fibers that take information from our brain and bring it to our bodies. But we have more nerve fibers that bring information from our tissues, our organs, to our brain. So there's literally more information going in that direction than this. But we talk about the body a lot, but we don't bring practices in as much as we could. we have this beautiful opportunity to use our bodies to change, to adjust our brains. Now, some people would say they're one and the same, but we often approach care like they're different. So I love the work of Ruth Lanius. She does some work around the default mode and looks at PTSD, and particularly treatment-resistant PTSD, which is, again, just another way to say complex trauma or trauma that has extended over time or had repeated events. It is fundamentally different in terms of how it can show up in symptomology or expressions of trauma. It's not to say it's better or worse than a single incident trauma, it's just different. So she looks at treatment-resistant PTSD. And what we see here is basically she does this research where, people will consent to research, they are going in the brain scan, and she's like, we're gonna turn on the machines, we'll start the study soon. And then she's scanning while people are idling, basically. Like, what happens when we're just hanging out? What it turns out is when we haven't experienced repeated trauma over the span of time, there's a lot of self-referential activity. So there's thinking, that's that light in the front. The medial prefrontal cortex is illuminated too. That's the part of our brain that is the watchtower, the part that's like, oh, I'm speaking on stage at this conference right now. Isn't that interesting? That's aware, that meta-awareness, and then all that's happening in the limbic system. So what we see is that, for one, in someone who is experienced complex trauma, we see a diminished self-referential activity. Diminished awareness of emotions, feelings, thoughts. The watchtower is not illuminated at all, right? That awareness of what I'm doing when I'm doing it. What we see is essentially, it's I think it's a posterior cingulate, which is like the GPS of the brain. But it's not even the GPS like I know that I'm here, it's just like pin drop. Different than I'm here and I know I'm here because I have conscious awareness that I'm here. I can feel myself here. So interoception, that was a word in the title of this talk. What is it? Interoception is our ability to feel and sense what is within us. So within our skin and including our own skin. Our stomach grumble, a twinge in our lower back, a heart flutter, breath increase. All of these things that really connect with our overall sense of well-being and emotions. If we think about interoception, we often also have sensations that are connected to a feeling or emotion. So if I'm someone who's struggled with disordered eating and I feel my stomach grumble, it's not just a stomach grumble, right? It's then the cascading of things. If I'm someone who has experienced sexual assault and I feel my heart rate increase, and that reminds me of the breath that happened in my traumatic experience, it's not just a heart rate increase, right? So it's deeply tied to those implicit memories, that what we sense and feel within our body. But as it turns out, being able to feel and sense what's in your body is really important for being able to be in the world, right? What do I want, more or less of something? When you are, I was talking about this last night too, when you meet someone and you get that ick feeling, you're like, ooh, I don't think I want to spend time with that person. It's like, what is that? That's a very sensory experience. There's all sorts of cues that are happening in our body. If someone were to say, well, what didn't you like about that person? Oh, I got the ick, right? And that is interoception. How does our body respond to something? How am I feeling? We go into therapy offices and our clients sit before us, we ask them how they're feeling. What happens when the interoceptive network is dysregulated, which we'll talk about? We saw that in the brain scan. We ask someone how they're feeling, I don't know, or I make something up. or I tell you what I think you want to hear as a client, right? Where am I feeling pain? What do I need? What do I need a nap? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need food? All of these things. Interoception helps us. How am I feeling today? And what we see is that oftentimes people who have experienced trauma over the span of time or repeated events is that they have a heightened exteroceptive ability. So exteroception, right, it's our ability to perceive our surroundings and take in shifts. There's really interesting research around complex trauma survivors that look at the face in still frames of a face going from laughing to anger. A person who's experienced complex trauma will recognize the face shifting 3 to 4 frames earlier than someone who hasn't. So beginning to recognize the furrowing of an eyebrow or the clenching of a jaw or whatever might happen when someone is laughing and then it shifts. And that's adaptive, right? When I am in a chaotic relationship or family or work environment, if I can predict a little more quickly how something is going to shift from being somewhat okay to really not okay, that's adaptive. And if I am also in conditions or environments that are not safe, relationally, emotionally, physically, whatever we're talking about, I'm probably not going to be turning inward. So what we see is that for many trauma survivors, their interoceptive network is dysregulated. Their capacity to sense and feel what is within their own body is impacted. And I know I'm saying trauma survivors as if we aren't also in the room. So some of you may have experienced this firsthand, and just naming that, of what it feels like when you actually need to disconnect from your body, or you learn to without even conscious awareness, so that you don't get triggered by that heart rate or by that stomach grumble. I work with clients who don't have sensation. They talk about not having sensation from like here down, certain places in their body. Or I also have kind of, if I'm putting people into buckets, which I don't always love to do, but some clients that are dysregulated in their interoceptive network in that every sensation feels like an emergency. So I either really try to wall off or I get overwhelmed by paying attention to my body. I had a client I worked with for many years who I think he had a connective tissue disorder and his hip would pop out of his socket, but he wouldn't recognize that as pain, that sensation. So powerful, had such a complex trauma history. And thinking about how adaptive that is and how that also gets in the way of seeking care, going to the doctor. And so trauma pulls us into the past, not only in a conscious thought way, but our bodies are responding in this moment to an experience that happened in the past. It's not pathological, it's adaptive, but it gets in the way of living. We live in a body and mind often that's responding to, at times, or sometimes chronically, to conditions of the past. So, what is it like to bring our awareness to the present moment, not just in thought, but in our bodies, to know that we are here? That is something that's different from trauma. My feet are on the ground, I feel them, I got my GPS, but I know that I'm here also. Yes. I got you. I'll repeat it. Yes. Yes, and I hear that, and I'm sorry that you are going through that. And there are so many ways, right, that the physical things that show up in our body can then cause other cascading impacts. Just audience member talking about her experience with a connective tissue disorder and then the impacts of that. So this is a quote from a follow-up study that we did. We had, from between 2008 2010, we did the first NIH study that looked at yoga as a treatment for trauma. So it was using our yoga model as a treatment for trauma. We did 10 weeks of yoga. We saw really great impacts. Okay, that's cool, but like, what happens next? Do people have to keep doing yoga? Is there an impact? So we did a follow-up study that looked at anywhere from 9 months to a year and a half out. Is there an impact from doing 10 weeks of yoga for someone who has had the diagnosis of complex trauma or PTSD for many, many years, and their incident trauma was in childhood? So this is a participant talking about the interesting thing about interoception, right? She talks about, in the past, I would be the type of person, I would spend time on the beach, and I knew I was there, not because I knew I was there because I saw my footprints, or else I would not know I was there. If you think about what a sensory experience it is to go to the beach, right? The way it feels in your muscles when you walk on the sand, the temperature of the water, all of the things, the way that the salt feels on your skin. But she didn't know she was there through sensing. She knew that she was there because she needed evidence. And then she talks about how after practicing yoga, yoga grounded me because of the movement and the breath, it just grounded me. Talking about knowing where she was because she could sense and feel it. Just to follow up, also, with this study, what we learned is that after 10 weeks of yoga, continuing yoga did maintain benefits, but what yoga was highly variable. Continuing yoga could be, I'm in my minivan, I've got my kids in the back, I'm at a traffic light, and I feel my feet on the ground and I take a few breaths. It could also be going to the local studio or gym. It could be doing sessions with us at that time. So interoception is, trauma teaches us, here's this, okay, so trauma teaches us that we have to prioritize someone else's needs over our own. Typically, in a traumatic dynamic, we are using our bodies, our way of being, to regulate someone who is dysregulated. It becomes a task that we shouldn't be tasked with, but is what happens. Right? We prioritize the needs of others over our own, whether it's a system, if we're talking about systemic trauma, an individual, a family, a religious belief. Whatever we're talking about when we're talking about trauma, we are subjugating our needs for something else or someone else. So being able to invite clients to feel and sense their bodies when they're in relationship to us as their providers is something that's powerful and different. So it's not just about feeling and sensing myself, it's doing that within the context of a relationship. I'm toggling between the needs of managing someone else, a relationship, and myself. So when we do this work, we practice alongside our clients. We close our eyes, we drop in as well. When we drop in like that, we're changing the power dynamics in the therapeutic relationship, right? Oftentimes we are trained and taught to observe our clients. That makes sense, right? And what is it like to say, I trust you enough to regulate your own body right now. I'm going to turn inward to mine, and we're going to do that together. So when we hand over, the mantle of expert, when we shift away from, let me say this, as a therapist, my training was I'm supposed to come in and have like the worksheets, I got the plan, I got the coping skills, and I'm gonna hand it to you, and then we're gonna do this thing together. And what I've begun to notice through the years is that oftentimes that can set up a paradigm for clients where they assume that they don't know what is best for them. Someone else knows what's best for them. It undermines the sense of, I can actually make choices that are good and right for me. We live in a world that also prioritizes data. I do too, I do research. But prioritizes data over what we feel and sense in our own body. It used to be, and maybe sometimes it's like this, you would go to your primary care doctor, and the information you gave them about what you felt and sensed was just as important as what the blood work said or what they observed. That paradigm is not present, at least in the masses these days. And so when we can learn and train in trauma, we continue to acquire learning, but at the very same time, we recognize that we are not an expert in anyone's experience and maintain curiosity. Then we're on to something. Then we're on to creating a paradigm where clients can reclaim the relationship to what they feel and sense in their body. Often one that has been either never been connected or shut down or hijacked. So my approach is that I may have expertise in trauma, but I don't have expertise in you or your experience. And then, with that support and encouragement, we get to create a place where clients can begin to become curious about what they feel and sense, their intuition. Again, trauma undermines all of this. If I am in an environment where I am unsafe and I am trapped in that environment, that's the hallmark of trauma, right? We are trapped in environments that are not okay for our bodies, for our emotions, for our spirit. If I'm trapped in that dynamic, it is helpful to not know that, to shut off and quarantine that information. But when the danger of the traumatic experience has passed, reconnecting that internal sense is really important to make decisions moving forward that are safer for me, that are healthier for me, that are right for me. And when we can invite clients into claiming their own expertise, something pretty powerful. So when we do invite clients into relationship and trust with their intuition and their interoceptive experience, it's important that we're not gaslighting them. So here's an example. I have a client that I have learned so much from through the years, and she and I were sitting in my office, and we were working through, kind of bumping into a pattern that she was struggling with, and we had been through before a cycle of certain feelings and behaviors. And then she stopped and said, "Are you angry at me?" And I lied. And I said, no, I was thinking about my kids. And then she said to me, "How do you expect me to build trust with you when all of the relationships in my life trust has been broken because people have lied or manipulated me or deceived me? You can't sit here and lie to me right now." I thought I was having good boundaries, right? I was like, I'm doing my job, right? And so in that moment, I was like, okay, I'm gonna take a big breath and take a risk here. I was like, yeah, you sensed, not only by reading me, but sensing within your body and my body. She and I practiced a lot of yoga together, slowly over time, that I was frustrated with you. If I continued to lie to her, that is me seeding distrust. That's like, it's not, nope, that was wrong. She was right. I was frustrated with myself and annoyed that I couldn't figure out a way out of this cycle we kept doing. And so we had this big conversation. It was intense, it was scary, to really say, yeah, you're sensing my frustration and annoyance. You're right. And yes, I just lied about that because I thought I was protecting you from having to deal with me. She's like, I want to deal with you. You're my therapist. How do I trust you if you're not being honest? And that is part of, in a lot of ways, how we can change the trauma paradigm, is when we show up in that kind of authenticity. Of course, we still have our boundaries. If I was really pissed at her, I probably wouldn't say that. But I could give her a version to say, you're not crazy. You got it. Part of what I think about as a therapeutic relationship as a chance to practice, like a lab for relationships in the real world. So if we're undermining clients' sense of themselves or us, what are we doing? When we can predictably sense ourselves, when our body isn't always changing, when we can predictably sense how we feel and know how we feel, that makes it easier to be in relationship with others. Being in relationship with other humans is very unpredictable. Right? You didn't know what I was going to be like when I came on the stage, right? You don't know when you're in a conversation with someone, what their mood is, what you're going to have to manage. If I'm also feeling an unpredictable relationship within myself, either I'm disconnected from my sense of self, it feels like everything's an emergency inside of myself, it makes it really hard to be in relationship. This is a long quote, but it's a worthy one. This is from that same follow-up study. Someone talking about how the relationship with their body and how it changed over time and how that impacted their ability to be in relationship with self and others. So I'll read it just because it's such powerful words. When you're abused, you feel small, even smaller than you are. That was my experience as a child. I wanted to be small and invisible if possible. I wanted not to be seen, and I constricted. Many of us may have clients that we see that hold their bodies in this way, right? It's self-protective. That can be a way also to wall off from feeling and sensation, so I don't have to fully know that I'm here or feel my body or feel my heart. I'd say the sense of being able to open up in this way physically, as simple as it sounds, the upper part of my body, my heart, my lungs, my diaphragm, shoulders, all of the parts that I had scrunched down, that seemed to make a difference. That was an overall expansion. And people are noticing it clearly. There is something that has changed because people are coming closer to me. I'm able to tolerate that better, and I'm reaching out more in ways that I couldn't have done. So this is someone who did the yoga sessions. We didn't talk about trauma. We didn't process. We moved our bodies in a trauma-sensitive way that brought in choice and agency and empowerment. And then this unfolded. So one of the things that I would love to offer is that we can trust our clients to make meaning and integrate the work that we do in embodied work. We don't always have to process it, and sometimes we can't because there aren't words. But it will still impact and change us. That is what the years of research that we've been doing has really taught us, is how powerful that can be. So that's what I got for you. I know we have 1 minute and 40 left. Feel free to scan the QR, but if there's any thing you want to speak into the space, a question or just a reflection. Yeah, the weightlifting model, absolutely. So the weightlifting model, trauma-informed weightlifting, it is a weightlifting model that we are using in all kinds of different settings, one-on-one work, residential work. It's really a lot about the same tenets that we utilize with the yoga program around empowerment, choice, agency, but also there's an expanding of the window of tolerance. So it's based off of Olympic-style weightlifting. We don't always do that because we don't have that gear always. But it's about kind of adding stress to your body. And again, the client is totally in control of that, to expand your capacity to feel that feeling that happens when you load up weight on your back and your heart rate goes up and your respiration increases. Yeah, and there's tons more to learn about it. You can link into this if you want to read some of the stuff and the research they're doing. It'll be through the healwithcfte.org. All right, we got 19 seconds left. We'll just call it, right? Thank you all so much.